and this is the case of the paraglider girls. This is a very interesting one because there was a judge at Westminster Magistrates Court. There are two women, Heba Alhayek and Pauline Ankunda. Another woman, actually, Noimutu Olayinka Taiwo, who's 27, off with, as Tom puts it, a slap on the wrist. They were charged with terrorism offences. And what happened was that last October they were spotted on a Palestine protest, pro-Palestinian protest, displaying images of paragliders. And this is something that a lot of people find deeply, deeply offensive. Of course, it was just 7 days after Hamas terrorists on paragliders flew into southern Israel before murdering many, many people. So it's just absolutely horrendous. They were found guilty, but the judge, who's a deputy senior district judge called Tan Ikram, showed, as Tom puts it, and I'll talk to him in just a second, considerable leniency. They got 12-month conditional discharge. The maximum sentence would have been 6 months in prison. So, Tom, what do you make of this? I'm sure, first, before we say this, Tan Ikram would be very clear that he hasn't shown bias in this case, but what do you think?
Well, it's an argument that's very hard to land given the revelations that have come in recent days, what with him being found a few weeks ago to have liked an anti-Israel post on LinkedIn by someone, the individual whose post he liked has been caught spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It's also worth pointing out that he's been sharing his opinions before. A couple of years ago, he gave a speech at a community college in the US where he talked about essentially all the kind of issues around race and policing, and even appeared to boast about one of the cases that he judged in which he actually sent a police officer to prison for 20 weeks as a consequence of him posting anti-black racist posts in a private WhatsApp group. So you stick those two cases together, you've got an instance of a police officer posting horrendous racist material, but in a private WhatsApp group. Here we have three individuals who are caught glorifying an anti-Semitic terrorist group out in the open in public, and yet they get a slap on the wrist. I should stress, I'm a sort of US-style free speech absolutist. I don't think any opinion, no matter how foul, should land you in the dock. But when you stand these two things next to each other, you cannot help but feel that a bias has crept in. And it's a bias that seems to come down very hard on certain forms of racism, but not on the one form of racism that is the most serious one that we're having to deal with at the moment.
And anti-Semitism is rising. We've seen that from the Community Security Trust this week. Over 4,000 different cases there that they have talked about. Many, actually, hundreds of them carried out by children as well. It's interesting you mentioned that about James Watts, that constable, and we can all agree that he absolutely should not have been sharing racist jokes. That was horrendous. He was sent to 20 weeks in prison. But, I mean, some people will say, look, I think it's ridiculously distasteful. I think it's horrible. I think the women should not have been wearing those. I think it was just really, really tasteless and horrible. Should they actually go to prison for that? Isn't that some version of free speech, or is it glorifying terrorism? Where does the law kind of stand on this, Tom? Because they were actually convicted of a crime, and you could say perhaps the judge has done his job there.
I think it's a tough one, this, because, as I say, I come to this thinking that these three individuals shouldn't have been sent to prison for what was basically expressing a foul opinion. They weren't members of Hamas. They're not terrorists in any meaningful sense. This is a free speech issue, and I would rather that cases like this never end up in a courtroom. I believe free speech has to apply as much for someone spouting one form of racism in private or another form of racism in public. As objectionable as that is, that's still something that should be dealt with via debate, free speech, ridicule, mockery, protest, and all the rest of it. But there is such a thing as the law, and I can't be the only one wondering if these laws are being very selectively enforced on the basis of a mix of things: political bias, identity politics, the sense that one form of racism, shall we say, a little less important than the other. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on this particular judge, but when you see situations like this, and we've seen it in the policing of the quote-unquote pro-Palestine marches that we've seen almost every Saturday since October 7th, where we've got a police force and a criminal justice system which is willing to come down very hard, not just on other forms of racist speech, but even kind of un-PC speech, gender-critical feminists having their collars felt, etc. And yet, when you have undiluted expressions of racism on the streets of London, nothing seems to happen. And I'm sure there are many British Jews in our society who are looking at that, wondering why the establishment and the criminal justice system doesn't have their back in that.
And not just Jewish people, I think other people as well who want to try to stand up for their Jewish friends and neighbours as well. We'll actually be talking about that in a second. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service has said that Tan Ikram, who is the judge who's involved with this, will not be making a statement. That's what the Crown Prosecution Service have said. We would obviously love to hear from him. I'd love to interview him about this. I'd love to know why he think it's appropriate to like a tweet on LinkedIn 3 weeks ago that's anti-Israel. The post, shared by a man with a fondness for spouting anti-Israeli conspiracy theories, calls Israel terrorist and repeated the Free Palestine slogan, Free Palestine from Hamas. That's what I say. But Tom, there will be questions about this and the independence of the judiciary as well, and the impartiality of the judiciary, because they're meant to not say, is this right or wrong? They're meant to look at the law, and what he said was, you crossed the line, but it would have been fair to say that emotions ran very high on the issue. Well, emotion doesn't matter, the law matters.
Absolutely. And I thought if you look at the language when he handed down that judgment, it is so incredibly curious. I mean, he basically pronounces that whilst they are guilty of these particular offences, therefore it meeting that legal standard of a reasonable person suspecting that they were expressing support for Hamas, that he didn't in his heart of hearts believe that they were doing so. So it stretches credibility that this was just a average, normal sort of judgment. That said, he does have a case to answer. He has his side of the story. He claims that he liked that post accidentally, which people will make up their own minds about that particular case. But I think it is important to stress this isn't just about one judge. I think what we've seen with the police response to the rise in anti-Semitism and the rise in anti-Semitic comments and so on is a very different experience to if there had been weekly marches, say, advocating on behalf of a terrorist group which was racist in some other form, which was attacking some other form of individual, which brutalizing civilians of a different ethnic group. So this is something that I think we really need to reckon with. And whilst this individual case and this individual should, of course, be looked at, there's a broader problem here about why all of the supposed protections of the multicultural state, which people preach about, have fallen away in the face of the rising anti-Semitism that we see.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk to Rabbi Jonathan Romain about